All right, everybody, welcome to the April 28th special meeting for Environmental Matters Committee. I want to thank everybody for attending. For roll call, everybody, all the committee members are present. And this is our second meeting where we're going to be chatting about the comprehensive plan draft. Before we get to that, can I get an approval of the agenda?
Move approval of the agenda.
I second.
All those in favor, please say aye.
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 Those opposed? Motion carries. Let's see, we have an approval. Could I get a motion to approve the minutes?
Move approval to approve the minute. Move to approve the minutes. Move approval to approve the approval of the.
I second what he said.
Right. All those in favor of approving the minutes from April 21st, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye. All those opposed? Motion carries. And now we're going to jump right into our conversation where we left off with comprehensive plan. And Mr. Lashinsky and Dr. Nash, did you anything you wanted to say before we jump in, or should we just pick off right where we left?
Well, I did want to just say thank you again for meeting with us again and going through this in detail. I did, before we start going through it in detail, I did want to go back to the guiding principles real quick. Julian, can you show those? And I think it's page 8. Yeah.
Oh, no, not the quiz again.
You don't have to take the quiz again. Keep going. It's that one, right?
Ross liked the quiz.
I just wanted to touch base back on the guiding principles to remind you how we've organized things, generally speaking, and to talk about these 3 main principles and the kind of subparts they have to them. And before we get into too much detail, I would like to hear if, let's say you had to come up with 3 goals for each of these principles for the environment. I just kind of interested in hearing your 3 top priorities for the environment in the city, how you would formulate those, and how you would measure them. I just kind of want to get a sense of your thinking on those. So it's sort of a quiz.
All right, so the top 3 goals or
right, your top 3 goals for the environment. If you could put 1 in each category, what would it be?
So
you mean in terms of the 3 categories: thriving city, functional city, and adaptive city?
Right. And you can kind of see what they touch on below them. So thriving looks at housing, neighborhood character, economic growth, connecting development, pedestrian bicycle facilities, and improving health outcomes.
How do they relate to the things on the left, equity, health, and
yeah, that's exactly right. Because improved health is under thriving city, even though that's under equity. So is there a 1-for-1 correlation there? Because
they're not exactly 1-for-1. There's plenty of overlap here, but they were sort of inspired by those foundational themes. I think that the thing to focus on would be those principles that are listed under each of the city visions.
Could you say that again, Eric?
I think the thing to focus on would be those principles that are listed under each of the thriving city, functional city, adaptive city. That would be the.
Well, I admit I didn't focus on this slide, so I'd have to get some thoughts together. But anything from my colleagues on the committee?
Well, I mean, on the first one, the ones that are important to my perception of my constituents would be 2 and 4. Housing affordability to me is a case yet to be made rather than asserted. On the second realm, I'm not even sure I understand enhanced public realm, but it sounds good to me. So access to community services, things like food deserts that I hear a lot from Upper Eastport, and equitable access to the water, again, 2 and 4. You know, obviously everybody would want a robust economy, but I'm not sure how the comp plan brings that off. For this committee, number 2, again, minimize carbon footprint would be, you know, all of those for this committee, I think would be, of my top 3, they would be the 5.
So let's focus on adaptive city then. So for you, some of your goals would include the things listed under for the environment would include preserving and restoring environmental assets, minimizing carbon footprint, improving water quality, adapting to increased flooding and heat impacts, and strengthening it and diversifying economic drivers.
Yeah, although again, I don't understand how the 5th one fits, and I'm not sure how it fits with environment.
Okay, so for preserving and restoring environmental assets, what is a way you think we could measure that? If that was our goal, how would we show you we were working towards that goal? What kinds of things would we do?
First, you'd have to define what are the environmental assets. What is it that we're preserving and restoring? And for me, that's things like creek restoration, planting more tree cover,
open space,
those sorts of things.
Preserving open space. Okay. So we would measure that by the number of creeks where we have a stream restoration project or something like that.
Yeah. All the things in the WIP.
Okay.
And we also, I think, have a lot of the metrics already with, for example, in the Forest Conservation Act metrics and critical area. I'm sure you have data on that too. Alderwoman Tierney, did you have some thoughts?
Yeah, my problem is I can't. I see them all sort of interrelated, and you know, environmentally, I guess. I mean, it all sort of relates to smart growth principles that you are giving a range of you know, housing options. That would be housing affordability. That would be really important. And then the pedestrian connectivity, I translate that into walkable neighborhoods, and preservation of open spaces. I see that in preserved and restored environmental assets. Yeah, and I think that the common thread of all that is if you preserve open space and you consolidate, I guess, neighborhoods to be self-sufficient and walkable, you know, you are preserving open space. You're creating denser. I'm not sure if I'm answering your question. I just.
Yeah, I see. You're saying you're saying we can have the same, for different goals, we can have the same measurements, I think is what you're saying.
Exactly.
So, because that we'll be moving towards that goal.
The same
if
goal.
we do this, we're getting there in different ways. So, I mean, because part of what you're saying is like minimizing carbon footprint, that second one, you're saying create more walkable places so people can drive less. I mean, that's a clear environmental goal, I think.
More alternate forms of mobility, but also moving to electric. No dirt bikes in Waterfront Park, or whatever we call it, Waterworks Park. I cannot believe dirt bikes in Waterworks Park. Give me a break. But an electric dirt bike, maybe. But the dirt bikes do so much environmental damage as far as
let's not digress too far.
I know that, but no. So moving to electric and putting more trees, because trees are good carbon sinks.
Okay, so number of trees and then number of EV charging stations or something like that, and then like linear feet of trail maybe.
City purchase of electronic vehicles.
And Dr. Nash, I mean, and so, I think what I would say, and not necessarily taking the numbers you have listed there, just looking at the titles in terms of thriving city, functional and adaptive. For thriving, I think what would come to mind for me environmentally would be, I think, environmental health. So the health of our creeks and the health of our forests and open space, because I see them as being critical to us having a thriving city, right? You're not going to thrive if our water is polluted and air and so on and so forth. And I think
we have metrics for water quality. How would we measure tree health of forested areas?
Air. We never talk about air quality, and I don't know whether we have good or bad air quality.
I think that could go in terms of forest health. I think that's something Brian could probably do. Just even if it's just I guess you could do this two ways. You could just do a cursory kind of walk through the forest to assess if there are a huge number of dead trees, dying trees, or invasive species issues. Maybe the Conservancy Board could help with that as well. I think that'd be much more efficient than doing a detailed forest assessment. And I don't think we really have too much reason to do a huge detailed assessment. We really want to just know generally, I think. But also the canopy coverage could be a part of that too. And in terms of air quality, that's always been a challenge. We don't really have a great way to monitor that. And we also get a lot of outside influence to our air quality. But
that's true. But we have pretty high asthma rates, which is a multifaceted issue. But the one correlation of high asthma rates is poor air quality. But you're right, a lot of it is are regional issues. But and
there are some localized. Like in my community, I noticed when the local elementary school, has their generators on, because they often run those. I don't know if they do it once a week or every day or just to test it out, but there's definitely a noticeable decline in air quality. And there are certain days, at least in this part of the city, where we notice, I haven't quite figured out exactly what the decline's from. And maybe it's just idling buses from the school. Not to pick on the school, but that's the only thing that comes to mind in terms of the possible big contributor. But yeah.
What about the FAA change in the airplane patterns all flying over Annapolis?
Yeah, that could be a contributor too. I've certainly noticed more noise pollution since they've changed that.
But when they jettison jet fuel, if it's jettisoned anything below 5,000 feet, it doesn't evaporate. So it comes down on us and on our water and on our trees and so forth. I don't know. I mean, the CFAA, I don't know we can do much about it, but it certainly is an air quality impact.
What was remarkable is how that improved during the pandemic.
Yeah, right.
Okay, so I'm thinking the things we probably have more control over as far as measuring our water quality and then doing field assessments of forest quality. And I guess there's probably some industry ratings of different forests, like they do for forest stand delineation. So,
and I think maybe getting the Conservancy Board, maybe Brian could help train them in some way, or partner with some other group or agency, nonprofit, who might be able to get them up to speed on doing some other assessments. Might be Alderwoman Tierney?
Yeah, I found it kind of alarming that the tree canopy has reduced in that. Was that a surprise to us? And I mean, that
Surprised. I don't know if everyone else was, but I was surprised. But
yeah, no, I guess, yeah. So we don't want that to happen again.
That it was, it's not really new development that's driving that. It's older trees being taken down. Mm-hmm. And I hear a lot of people, including my husband, who is terrified of trees falling on the house. And I'm always like, why is he so afraid of that? Like, there's.
I have a number of neighbors who've gone through that, and then you get the same contractor who goes around and scares other people into taking down trees.
Yeah, and
it can be really a problem, but maybe we need to, and I know the issue always comes down to staffing and time, but maybe we need a program that, I don't know if we've ever had an adopt a tree program, but if we could identify some of the larger canopy trees, even in backyards, we could maybe even just get an intern to drop off some materials to them, a pamphlet saying, we realize there are large trees on your property. Here's some information on taking care of them. Here's a tree, I don't know, sponsorship program. I don't know.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. It might be worth talking to West Annapolis Civic Association or Wardour Improvement Association about that, because it seems like it's mainly in West Annapolis, Wardour, and Admiral Heights where we're having a lot of those losses right now. Mm-hmm. I don't know. It's just the age of the homes and the trees, maybe. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Well, we're getting a lot of losses in backyards in Ward 8. I mean, there's been an incredible number of trees that have come down in backyards. And that's why I brought that up the other day and saying maybe we need to change the code. So wherever you take down a tree, there's an exchange, a 2-for-1 exchange program, or whatever, the requirement is given the diameter of the tree that comes down.
Well, I also feel like our street tree program is getting more traction because of the Forest Conservation Act changes. There's people have to plant more trees, and now they're like, where am I going to plant these? And so I think we're kind of like street trees. We've been pushing that. Maybe it's just that we've been pushing it a lot more. And Brian's working on updating the street tree plan. So I feel like there's good energy around that.
I don't want to, I'm interrupting, I don't want to digress into budget, but isn't there an opportunity for an intern for Brian? That would be such an exciting, job to intern. And if, somebody in environmental, I don't know, science or just arborist, I don't know. It's just a thought, an intern opportunity.
You don't have to pay interns. That's the benefit. It just experience.
I know.
I don't know what I'm doing. A lot of interns are flocking to the stuff I do. I could probably start sharing with Brian.
Yes.
But no, it's been kind of strange. Like, we have a UVA PhD student who's been working with us on kind of equitable resilience strategy. And then we have a St. John's student who wanted to be an intern working with us on the bike network stuff. I think we just need to find the programs that have, where somebody, would have the expertise to assist Brian and kind of target those programs. And I think there's a lot to be gained from working with us here. So,
absolutely. And Sally, on the point about the mitigation, I think we need to put that on the committees. I don't know if Jackie Gold is on this meeting or not, but for both of you, I guess, put it on our parking lot. Maybe I should say in our forest for the committee, in our park. But just to have a conversation about the mitigation in the sense that there is a narrative, I've heard it from a couple folks that even in the city, even that developers are saying that they have difficulty finding places to mitigate for the forest conservation. But I also hear, I think we've heard from Jackie Gobb before that there are, and I think there are plenty of places to put street trees. And I think so. I think we just need to have a more of a discussion about that. Like really identify where the problem is. Is it that we have a short amount of potential planting sites, or is it just we're not getting enough information to the developer, or is it just that the developers aren't offering any kind of incentives to people to put trees on their property? So there's just a lot to, I think, to discuss about that as we figure out.
I know there was concern about requiring the easement, but I think we talked about having different language requiring a landscape maintenance agreement, but not necessarily a permanent easement or something. What was that discussion, Rob? Do you remember?
Yeah, that was a conversation I think I had recently with some folks from the mayor's office about that. They had
just making it easier to.
Yeah, and I don't know. That's another, I think, more detailed conversation we need to have at a later date, just because there are a lot of consequences, I think, to moving from a full easement to a conservation easement to a landscape easement, because you lose that perpetual protection. And in some cases, it maybe make sense to have flexibility, but I think we just have to be really careful with how we do it, because we don't want to undermine the whole. We don't want to end up losing more forest in the mid to long term than we're gaining. But yeah, so yeah.
Okay, so it sounds like of these ideas we've been talking about, your top priority, I don't know if this is your top priority, seems to be the preserving and restoring environmental assets. But maybe it's not number one by far. Do you agree with that?
Well, maybe for thriving city, but I had other thoughts on the other two. Like for functional city, I think maybe open space, access, connectivity, and just access to the open space and our other assets. I think that seems to, because that to me tells me that you have to be functional. You have to have people who are able to enjoy it and access. And
okay, so protecting and preserving open space and making sure it's accessible to people so they can enjoy it, and then that feeds back into them wanting to protect it and perpetuate it.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, and then under adaptive, I'd say the climate change, which we've already mentioned, adapting climate change, but also adapting to really the built environment. We are urban, suburban, built environment. So we have to really adapt to, that could mean things like improving stormwater management, improving surface reduction, that kind of thing. We can't, necessarily expect to have a huge increase in open space, but then again, I think there is room to increase open space, but it's just adapting to
Okay, so you mean like retrofitting our urban environment in a way that better mitigates for the environmental impacts of those original developments?
Yeah, it's one example, which I know you've heard me say before, is the giant shopping center, the huge parking lot, and very rarely ever fills up anywhere near. So, in terms of adapting, maybe we need to adapt to these new needs that we have in terms of improving water quality, or even adapting to some of the change in mobility to either remove some of the parking lot, put in stormwater management, or remove some of the parking lot and put in, or turn it into some kind of mobility hub, which people have also mentioned to me. So just I guess, because I know at the time that was, the parking requirements, but I think we really need to kind of adapt and adjust some of those old grandfathered properties to have some kind of greater functionality and
so Rob,
residents.
I just was reading some email that showed a community where in their shopping centers they put solar panels as cover across each of the parking aisles, so it actually provided shade in hot weather, but also shelter from rain in rainy weather, but in addition, produced a whole heck of a lot of solar energy power. So, kinds of things like that. And maybe those, encouraging those come with some set of incentives that when the owner of that property does that kind of installation, aside from the fact that I think the community would reward them with patronage, maybe they get some other kind of break or some other kind of credit.
Like a break in parking requirements or something?
Well, we need to look at the whole parking requirements. The Maritime Advisory Task Force is really exciting a lot of questions about parking requirements. And I have to tell you, the article in the Capitol about Hopkins Plaza and those people not wanting to change back, I immediately called Franyo and I said, what are you guys going to be doing when the state of emergency is off with all of your tents in the parking lots? Where are you on your return of business? And he said his business has pretty much returned to the 2019 level. And I said, what's funny about that, Dick, is I haven't been getting a lot of complaints from the community about people not having parking at the boatyard, that they're finding places in the community to park. And so it made me question, I don't even know when our parking legislation went into effect or why or what it was based on, but maybe we don't even have the right parking rules for things. I know isn't it in Bethesda, Sally, where they are requiring developers to provide less parking rather than more? Someplace over
I don't know. I've read about that. Yeah. In my planning magazines that there are places that are doing that now.
If you're going to have parking, let's make it multifunctional. I think what you said, Rob, about, and that's what they're doing in the Eastport Shopping Center. They're putting in a lot of stormwater control management systems. I'd like them to restore the creek going into Jones Cove as well. But putting up solar arrays over top of the parking lot, which gives some additional advantages, like shelter from rain and sun, may be a problem if there's a heavy snow. I don't know. They'd have to be designed properly. But that's a whole nother increment as we move from fossil fuels to renewable energy. That's a huge thing we could do across the whole city. And I like those things on the city dock where the seawalls are a shade over the walkway and then tilt down when there's high water. So I think all of those kinds of functionality that we can do where it's serving multiple purposes, and maybe the shopping center itself gets first dibs on the power that's generated so they can reduce their electric bill. Anyway, just a thought.
Yeah, lots of good ideas.
Mm-hmm. I think the goal, I don't know if it's a goal, well, it is a goal, is to decrease our impervious, our existing impervious footprints, if you will. And that's, that's the parking lot at Giant is just shameful. I mean, it's just, but that, again, that's compressed development and then opening it up to more open area. Because we're, the hugest, one of the biggest threats is the flooding. I mean, I know, I'm so excited about it being addressed at City Dock, but, what about Back Creek? And, are we going to start having houses on stilts? We've really got to focus on minimizing our impervious surfaces, because we've got less and less space to implement, our state standards for MDE. We're running out of land.
Is there
I don't know how you summarize that. What's that?
Is there already a policy to allow for with the stormwater fee? If commercial properties put in the improvements, do they get a break on their stormwater fees? Is that something that makes sense?
It's minimal. We really need to overhaul it to make it more substantive, but also maybe even have some kind of escalator if they don't make the retrofits themselves. Because one of the issues we have is also all these Watergate Village and Spot Creek or Spot Cove apartments. I have a number of apartments in my ward also. They have zero stormwater treatment. So how do we, they're clearly not they don't care much about the incentives for the reduction in the stormwater fee. We need to figure out a different approach because those properties have to be retrofitted somehow to have some kind of treatment, any treatment. And I know they don't have to necessarily lose parking. They could put permeable pavers underneath the actual parking spots and have those drained to an under drain or connect to the storm drain system. There are plenty of options. It's just a matter of either incentivizing them or requiring them or both. That's something certainly on my list if I get reelected to look at that next term.
What do you think it would take to incentivize them?
I don't know. I don't know. I think we need to look at that more. Maybe we have to set up some kind of public-private partnership opportunity where we could provide some kind of resource to make it easier for them, but also just, again, maybe some kind of escalation of their fee if they don't do it by a certain date or I don't know.
Yeah, because we were just briefed on the finance committee about the escalating fees, and I mean the one incentive we have to use that fee whether in a penalty, in a punitive way or a reward way somehow. I think that's the only leverage we have.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think Sally, you and Eric, I think Sally, at least I know I've heard from you. We've worked together longer. I think I've heard you talk about other incentives you've come up with for other development initiatives. So, just I think another thing we should put on our part to look at later, to talk about later.
Just a general comment on this slide. It just every time I look at it, I have to admit I get a little frustrated, and I almost would feel like it does better if you align the left-hand side across the top, because I don't think that the three things, they're color match, but they don't really match. And in fact, health is up in equity instead of under health. So it almost feels like we have equity, health, and resiliency are broad categories. And then underneath it are an array of goals that, for example, the last one in the bottom goal, the blue, feels to me like it should go up in the top one. And I don't have it in front of me anymore.
Strengthen and diversified economic.
Yeah, so there's a lot of things that economic equity and opportunity, and then the one that talks about the community. Well, I forget what it is. Julian, can we put the slide back up, please? Because it felt like it was a complement to more open space. It was the connectivity of development, and connectivity implies to me trails and walkways and greenways and things like that. So that has to me an environmental feel.
I think it kind of makes sense. And I don't know if did we lose Julian?
Yeah,
I'm not sure.
Why did we?
But
yes. So we're having a little.
Julian quit. Oh no!
No, he's still here. His computer just kind of.
Where did he go?
Quit.
Don't quit, Julian.
Too much work going on with that computer.
He just punched him.
We have to insert another quarter and then.
Okay.
I think one thing that helps bring them together is the black text. So like for adaptive city, if you read the black text in the middle, how can we better prepare for, respond to, and adapt to more frequent turbulent events? So that's in one word. If you had to summarize that in one word, it's resilience. But if you had more words, then you can look at this adaptive city theme and the things that are under it. So, I don't know. It might be too much going on in that slide, but I think that's what we were trying to imagine. Like if you had one word, what is it? But if you have more words, what is it?
Right.
And
so it's almost like a Rubik's Cube where you twist, because I think really all of the 15 goals could apply to each one of those to some degree, maybe health less than the others, but I was sitting here thinking, if I cut the strips and rearranged all of these things, I could really, yeah. So when you look at this and you look at the economic drivers, that feels to me like strengthen and diversify economic drivers really feels like a thriving city to me. Improved health looks like more of something that would belong next to the block that says health. But I'm not sure that they all don't apply to each one of the three main themes. Mm-hmm. So not having them color coordinated, but having equity with its describer, health with its describer, and resilience. And then underneath it, having these 15 sets of goals, which then each, I assume the way it's constructed or going to be constructed in the draft report, each one of those has their own set of subsets to it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so, that makes sense.
Yeah.
I think the reason why strengthened and diversified economic drivers is in there is because for resilience, we wanted to look at it not just from the environment, but also from the economy, and how does our local economy respond to turbulent events like COVID? You know, how can we build in enough resilience in the system that we can respond, you know, no matter what is thrown at us? If it's a recession, is it a pandemic? Is it a radical shift in, you know, the retail environment? We want to make sure our economy can recover from those kinds of things.
You know how this could be really, I'm freaking out here. This would be really cool demonstrated in a Venn diagram, because you could have a circle. Because you could have a circle for thriving city, a circle for functioning city, a circle for adaptive city, and then have the 5 subjects in there. And you can play with how those subjects can be in 1 or 2 or 3 circles. Mm-hmm. That would be, I'll do it.
Okay.
No.
And then we could turn it into a game and sell it.
I think it's good to think of these as all connected. And, you know, if Julian, if you could go to the slide before it, that shows there's all this interaction, and that's the way we need it to be. We want the synergy to be coming through to you clearly. So talking about environment is a little artificial because we touch on so many other things, and there's a lot of ideas that will run all the way through the comp plan in different ways. So I think, but that is hard to show graphically. So Alderwoman Tierney, have a go at it.
There you go.
All right, so should we move on to some of the other specific goals?
Sure, yeah, thank you.
Julian, can you remove this for a minute? All right, and so, well, actually, I guess it'd be good to keep the presentation up. So going to the community facilities, which starts on slide 47, because I think the last time we left off, we chatted. Well, was there anything else from the Committee on Transportation? That's kind of where I rushed in a few comments at the last meeting about EV charging, residential EV charging. But was there anything else on transportation the committee wanted to bring up?
Well, I like your idea about the hub.
Yeah, no, I think a multimodal hub. I remember the Fred's, whoever's the Ward 2 Republican talking about regional transit. I don't know why that whole thing with Howard County and Anne Arundel County and part of PG County died, but we really do have to have a more regional transit system. We can provide the buses and the facilities, but as many people pointed out to us when we were doing it, people's rides don't often stop at the city borders. And so part of transportation planning, and this really fits hand in glove with this whole notion of, if we're going to develop, we need to go up, we're going to have more density. And that's fine as long as density is accompanied by true adequate public facilities. And one of the biggest ones is transportation. So I think in the last time we were talking about this, we said, well, get people out of cars and onto buses or onto bicycles or walking. Let's go look how well that worked in Los Angeles or any place on the West Coast. But if we're going to get more dense, it does seem to me that we have to recognize that is going to bring in more transit. And having lived in Columbia and watched Reston, this whole notion that people are going to live, work, and play in the same place just doesn't apply to human beings. They still are going to want to be in Annapolis for the things that Annapolis provides, but work in Washington because that's where their professional career credentials provide employment. And so we really do have to get real on our transportation goals, our mobility goals.
Well, yeah, and Alderman, I think we do need to be able to put in some of those projects and infrastructure improvements, including, I think, that kind of idea with a possible transit hub or whatnot at the Giant. Just as an example, I'm not sure if that necessarily makes sense, but that's one reason why I was trying to push for our traffic APF to allow for some collective mitigation projects, is because I think that's where, if we can identify some ideas, I could see some developers, because I agree with, I think, some sentiments from Dr. Nash that you've made in the past about moving to a different model of assessing our traffic, or at least mitigating, allowing for more mitigation. Because I think if we could get money to go to, I don't know, some kind of other fund, transportation fund, that would be able to, we could spend on updating these, putting in some kind of mobility transit center, or even expanding sidewalks, or putting new sidewalks, that kind of thing. I think that might make sense, because I know you've spoken about it before about wanting more mixed use, and it seems like you have to really have that kind of infrastructure to make mixed use really work, right? So people can bike or walk or use a shuttle, something to where they want to get, or in this case, electric vehicle infrastructure.
I think we're looking at it kind of from both directions. I mean, there's certainly gaps that the city can work to fill through, our regular the mechanisms, the funding mechanisms we already have, which aren't not enough, and then there's the gaps that we can fill through the developments themselves, and be more clear about the kinds of contributions that can go the farthest in terms of alternative modes. I think that's where the APF update is really critical. So we're super clear on how to kind of complete the network. That these new developments need to be a really important player in that. I think that the emphasis on the mixed use is really, I sense in the conversation I have that there's still kind of an education gap in just kind of understanding the how just it requires a little bit of imagination to sort of project out into the future this future Annapolis where somebody doesn't have to, is encouraged to not use their car to go 5 blocks away or something, or even 10 blocks away. But that's kind of the goal, to sort of locate things that have some relationship with one another closer together. Yeah.
Alderman Attorney?
Yeah, it's sort of a three-legged stool, because downtown Annapolis could be a perfect example of a mixed use, if you will. But you still have workers in storefronts on Main Street that have to go schlopping to Glen Burnie, So that's unfortunate, So there's that missing element of affording them housing, because they would live nearby. people would live nearby to where they work. I always tell the story of the Capitol Gazette, having a wonderful storefront or a building on Maryland Avenue and having to leave because there was that missing middle. There wasn't any place for journalists, to live. And so applying that to downtown, I don't have a choice other than to use our existing inventory to try to accommodate housing. But I mean, that's sort of the model, a model I use for mixed use, and applying that to, somewhere on Forest Drive. I mean, it is that missing middle as far as employment. I mean, any sort of, a restaurant worker or a yoga instructor, would love to live, above where she has her studio. I see that as a real viable option and real exciting option. And I there's a development on West Street, and it's terrible how I identify things on where they are with Starbucks. It's near the Starbucks on West Street. That's terrible, but and there's a yoga studio there, and I met her at the Starbucks, and I said, "Oh, where do you live?" And she said, "Oh, I live up there." And she was pointing to the I think it's one that has a lot of MPDUs in it.
Mm-hmm. It does.
Yeah.
It was 1901 West, and then
it just recently changed. And I thought,
mm-hmm.
Well, what a wonderful success story that is.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think downtown is really our model for a lot of what we're trying to show in the comp plan as far as blending the human scale with ways to have employment and living together. We do need to get that price point right. But there are like some of the people who work at CVS, they live downtown. There's some of that, but just making it so people have more options than they have now, I guess, is our goal.
Yeah. And let's not forget, from an environmental standpoint, you're saving on that travel. It's horrifying to see the commute on 97.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Or even
so hopefully that's what we've learned from the pandemic, is that we can work from home more.
Yeah, I hope so. All right, well, it's almost 4. I want to make sure we have enough time. We have two big categories left, community facilities and sensitive areas, which I'd like to get to before we like to try to get out of here by 5. So moving on to, let me bring up my slides, up to slide number 47 is community facilities. And
Julian, can you go to that slide? Oh, thank you.
So on the next page, and you'll
keep going for a while. Yep.
47. Okay. It's the green after this section. Here we go.
Back up. Thanks.
Yeah, back up. There you go. You can just stay here. That's fine. But there were some maps in this section, which I think are really great. You showed the unified and connected park system, open space equity, equitable waterfront access, which I think we recognize from the Maritime Task Force. And going through some of these goals, all these goals look great. I want to go to the first one. Julian, if you go forward 2 slides. And the first one's dealing with merging, sorry, wrong way.
But you know what? This might be not the right presentation, because I think we had the recommendation. Okay. Maybe I should share.
Oh, sorry. This is the one I thought we were looking at, but I see that doesn't match what Rob was saying. Which one is Rob looking at?
It's called Environmental Matters Presentation dated 4/21.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Julian, I'm going to send it to you real quick, because I think it'd be better if you share it. I have it here.
Send it to all of us.
I just opened up the one Takia sent.
Yeah, I'll send to everybody. It's only a 6 meg file, but it's the same one that, let's see.
So the first goal I wanted to look at under community facilities deals with merging, and Julian, when you get it, it's on slide 53, page 53, but it deals with merging Annapolis Parks and Recreation System with its evolving network of conservation areas and trails to create a comprehensive greenway system. It's again, very, very good goal, and some of the recommended actions you have. The first one was revising the mission of the Conservancy Board to include regular coordination with Department of Parks and Rec. Just a quick comment there. I think it might be worth to throw in the Recreation Advisory Board, the Citizen Commission. And then, I thought 2 was good, 3 was good. The 4th recommended action had maintain an online GIS map of greenways that includes prioritized conservation opportunities updated annually. And I think having that system, the map, and that map of the prioritized opportunities, I think if we make sure that's integrated with the planning process, and maybe that's implied with all of this, but I think it's worth stating in terms of, because I think that's really ultimately, the purpose of these greenway plans and things like that are to make sure they are, I guess, brought to the attention of reviewers and also the applicants, but also in case of in some of our code, it then elevates it to have a certain priority for protection. And so I think that's the importance of getting these greenway plans, and that by kind of default integrates these plans with the development process. But in some cases, our laws don't necessarily allow for that yet. And so I think it just stating, I guess my question would be to planning staff, do you understand what I'm saying? So do you see it as important to make sure that those are connected in the process?
That makes sense for both prospectively and also for, when we happen to have the opportunity and people are looking for a project, we can point them in that direction.
Yeah.
But also something we can plan for in the future.
Mm-hmm. Any other comments on this goal from the rest of the committee?
Just looking through them now.
Okay.
I do think this coordination with the county, I see Rick Anthony has retired, but he and I had spoken often about how coordinating all of these park facilities, he was thinking more for sports facilities, but coordinating all the park facilities between the city and the county would be a good idea. I have a feeling that would excite some turf war anxieties, but I think we need to look at the more global good of having these things coordinated. And just like with bus routes, the bus rides don't stop at the borders. Same thing with green space and parks and trails, and those things, they don't stop at the city borders either. In fact, some of our best bicycle trails are outside of the city.
Yeah, there's a huge opportunity at College Creek, in my opinion, where the city is prioritizing what's now called Robert Eads Park. Historically, it was College Creek Park, little pocket park. Mm-hmm. But the county, has a much larger piece of real estate on the water right next door that is really, there's a number of community projects there. There was a cleanup recently for the Bertina Nick Memorial, and connecting those sites makes a ton of sense. So that's kind of a pretty easy example, I think.
Alderman Tierney?
Is this goal supposed to address access to the parks. I mean, two real life examples is the Waterworks Park had a presentation of adaptive reuse of the pump house or whatever's there, to be a maker's building. And the question came up is, how will they get there? How can somebody get there from Dewan's ward, on a bike or whatever, or, any sort of connectivity. Another example is we have an issue with skateboarders down at Campbell Park, and we have a very adequate skateboard park at Truxton. And it's like, how do we tell those skateboarders to get from point A to point B? So there's this access. There's an access problem. And it's not even that far mileage wise. I'm not sure how, there's a connectivity, but there's also access. How do you get there?
Yeah, that's a great point. I mean, we could speak to that in that Waterworks goal, because it's obviously a huge priority of the mayor as well. He spends a lot of time talking about that, the West-East Express as this ultimately the crosstown corridor to Waterworks. But we, in the short term, we also have a parking issue there that we're trying to resolve, and it's access is definitely a hot topic at Waterworks right now. So integrating that into that goal, I think, makes sense. I mean,
it is funny though, because it's not 7 square miles, and you would think but the optics are so different.
Well, the challenge, like Eric said, is the parking, but there are a lot of sensitive areas, state recognized sensitive areas in that property. So I'm going to catch up to that goal. If we move on to the next slide, which is goal 2, and this talks about expanding park facilities strategically to achieve equitable access. And for the recommended actions, I wanted to mention, I think it might be worth listing in these actions, connecting it to the green enhancement or green opportunity areas. Those areas might be areas that could see this type of expansion, and could be included in our mapping in that regard. I don't know if you want a different name for them or what, but that's
environmental enhancement areas. That's what we're calling them.
Yeah.
So I guess I have a question on how you would operationalize this, and I'm thinking about the Eastport Shopping Center and the whole go around with the recreational requirement. And then I started thinking about the BB&T building, which was an award-winning restoration project, but as far as I know, is now empty. I don't know what the prospects are, but how can we have a program where we can try to get these things within a certain radius of each other, where we identify buildings that could be repurposed, as in repurposed to be a small park area right across from the school, by the way. And I'm not sure that's a really good example or even economically viable, but if we're going to try to increase these small park areas, how do we actually do that? How do we find the space for them? And how do we pay for it if we do find it?
Well, yes, I think our thinking with this one was for adequate public facilities. That applies to residential and mixed use new projects over 10 dwelling units. So it's not every new redevelopment, but the idea is that we don't have a lot of space, so they're going to have to provide the mini park, because there aren't a lot of options. Then if they're not in nearby a neighborhood park or community playfield, maybe there's other options of enhancing other mini parks or creating trails or, somehow making it easier to get to existing facilities. But that the mini park was kind of the no negotiation. You have to provide some green space of this size.
So an ideal opportunity could have occurred with the shopping center in St. Luke's when they were doing their work, that they could have helped support that whole thing. That would have to be the right alignment of two sets of circumstances, but
it would. But yeah, we put in the proposed or what we've talked about it with the proposed change to the APF is that you can partner with someone to provide this space. It has to be publicly accessible from dawn to dusk. But that would have been a perfect example if the timing had worked out.
Right.
Or even with Watergate, perhaps. I don't know what kind of arrangement could have been worked out there, but yeah,
like with those tennis courts right there, which are really rarely used, but could be potentially more broadly used. And I think I hear from Katie George that Watergate is now thinking about just rehabilitating their buildings and not expanding, but they are going to have to come in for some permitting. And that would be a time to talk to them about things like sharing the courts, or even working with the restoration of the creek there by the post office and the tennis courts going into Jones Cove. Anytime we get an opportunity for them as they need to get improvement or permits, that we talk to them about, yeah, sure, but how about helping us restore this small scoured out area to not have Jones Cove so silted up.
I wonder what they'll trigger if they're not adding new dwelling units. So they'll have to bring certain things up to existing code, but
how would they not have to be subject to MPDUs? I mean, there's 604 units there. If they're going to keep that same number of units, if they restore them, which is what I hear from Katie, they're talking about Class A luxury apartments on the water side and the towers, and market rate units on the backside of the towers. And then for the garden apartments, they're talking about market rate, a mix of market rate and affordable housing. So
if they're not adding new units, the MPDU requirement wouldn't be triggered.
Okay, well, they're going to have to get permits to do something. And so, and they are already talking, at least according to Katie, of doing some affordable rates in the garden apartment, affordable rate units. So, I mean, sounds to me if they're doing that, they're on the right track already. We don't really need to do more with that, but
well, maybe there's something from a regulatory perspective we can offer them to help incentivize some of the other things we want. But it's just not as clear cut if they're not adding new units. But I think we can also all be grateful if they don't want to add new units. So.
Yes, yeah. And of course, we do want to ask for a stoplight at Americana and Chesapeake.
Careful what you wish for.
Right. Well, see, they won't have to do a traffic study either if they're not adding.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah.
All right. So
I love this goal. I love this goal. It's so
good.
It's so New Yorkish.
Eric, I do have a comment about, and it's kind of, I'll be making this comment on some of I think it's kind of a general comment about some of the goals is, and this is, I don't know how you want to do it, but my observation on this is I think it could be a lot more succinct. So for example, just ended after, expand park facilities strategically to achieve equitable access for all, and just have that be a period, because the rest of it really is your performance metrics you already have mentioned. And it kind of makes it just makes it more wordy, and I think in many regards more difficult to understand at first read. if people want the details, they can read on to see what the exact metrics are. But
oh, I see. Yeah.
That's a good point. We're having our performance measures training next week, so we might be able to improve all of this.
Clear and to the point. Yeah. Yeah, Rob is right, because you do say it down below.
Yeah, you're right. You're right. And we should probably try to make all the goals a little bit more some just straightforward.
So going on to the next goal, goal 3. Julian, if you go to the next slide. This one has to deal with prioritizing equitable waterfront access by creating new parks. And that, again, that one could probably just end right there by creating new parks. But in terms of the performance metrics, I was thinking maybe, one idea for performance metric could be including something for equity to ensure each creek has equitable spatial access. You may need to have higher concentrations in some neighborhoods that don't necessarily have mobility. I'm thinking maybe parts of Ward 6 there might just not be mobility might be an issue for some of the residents. But I think it'd be important to make sure each creek, and of course the people on Spa Creek. Well, I'm going to speak for Alderwoman Tierney for her ward, but it seems like your ward might have the least amount of issues with mobility potentially. But in any case, I just think that's something to take into consideration. Look at it on a creek basis.
On this one, we talk about Hawkins Cove. We're mum on Wells Cove. And I think that Wells Cove is still very much on the minds of many. And the mayor and I are both in sync with each other, saying we do want to get some kind of water access there. So that's.
My hope is that will be resolved before the comp plan is out. But Hawkins,
well, it better be. I still don't understand what's going on there, but I talked about it with the CIP of adding it as a CIP with a placeholder, just like we have a placeholder for Hawkins Cove.
Alderwoman Tierney?
Yeah, I think this is really important to look at in a comprehensive way, because as we all know, based on the reaction to the truck to Tucker Street, right? These street end parks sort of become so territorial with the adjacent residents. And I'm going through that now with an improvement down at Cheston, and there's a community meeting, and they're like deciding what goes there, and this is what we want, and all that, and it's like, whoa, wait a minute, this is public space, and we have to be sort of the grown-ups in the room to say this is a public space. We understand the scale of it. We're not going to open it up to the world. I mean, we have to have some kind of plan. Otherwise, it's just this crazy free-for-all. Or it defaults into this residential park. And the residents can, be very protective of it for all good reasons. But yet, the word is equitable. And we have to, it was really hard on the Tucker Street landing to sort of come to some compromise, and it still isn't making them, they're not happy. They still, we opened it up to just the county, and we just got an email from the residents saying they want to meet and us to change what we voted on. So it just has to be comprehensive. What's that, Rob?
We have to be good neighbors. Yeah. And we have to, like you're saying, really, public access is public access.
Public access is public access. Until it's in your front lawn, I mean, I guess that you just don't know.
We almost need like a public access bill of rights here,
Yeah.
Because there is this feeling that, things are being done, very ad hoc, from site to site, but there's this general, I sense a general citywide desire to have, equitable and more waterfront access. And that I'm excited, I was excited to hear recently that the National Park Service wants to contribute to a water access study. that they don't want to fund the whole thing, I don't think, but they want to contribute, a healthy chunk to it. And that kind of plan, would be really helpful, I think, to kind of look at everything holistically, that we have all these different sites that there's parking constraints at most of them, but they should all be pretty accessible. And how can we expand those places in between, whether we have gaps? And so that's something I'm excited about. Help.
One of the performance measures I think would be important here, or a metric, if you will. For example, I know that a brewing water access issue is at Moss Haven Court, where there's a very well hidden access to that part of Spa Creek. And it was one of the first things I did when I got on the Eastport Civic Association board was we looked at all of the different water access points that should have been, like the Sears House at the end of State Street, which blocks off that water access. And the recent quitclaim filed against Bill Jones Alley that Gary Elson let be processed, and now the two property owners adjoining it have that access and the community doesn't. So it does feel to me like one of the first things to do, probably working with Public Works, is just go through and identify all of these potential points, these water access points.
Yeah, I think it's a good step to do. All right.
I bet Sean Wampler could pull it up in nanoseconds.
Probably. Are folks going to move into the next goal? Goal 4. It talks about it. So it talks about expanding the operations budget for the Park and Rec system to reach more residents, expand program offerings, et cetera, et cetera. But another suggestion on the wording here, because I think in reality, the goal is not to expand, or shouldn't be, I think, to expand the budget for Parks and Rec. The goals are to reach more residents, expand program offerings, activate underutilized resources, and improve maintenance of our facilities. I think that's really the ultimate goal. And in terms of how, because I don't think necessarily expanding operations budget is the only way to meet those goals. That may be one of the ways to get there. So that may be one of the recommended actions. But I think in terms of how we do maintenance, I think in terms of we can partner with communities and also with other local organizations, nonprofits to adopt a park and to organize cleanups. And so I think, does that make, you understand what I'm trying to say with that one, Eric?
Yeah, you're right. That is the goal. The goal isn't to expand the budget. The goal is to reach more residents. Well, I mean, Archie made us put this in, so.
Yeah, well, good luck on increased budget.
But I think coming from, other places where I've worked, previously here, I do think there's a lot of opportunity to increase resources beyond, tapping into the general fund. There's concessions, there's, leveraging private funding. The city, there's a recommendation here about this kind of foundation that could exist that a lot of cities have, that are trying to amplify their parks. And there's a lot of potential private funding out there. I think that if they had a way to kind of channel it to specific projects, but a lot of times you need people who take this on, in the community.
Yeah, and I think again the volunteer opportunities. I've done cleanups in the parks. Maritime Museum has had over here at Ella Moyer Park has had cleanup events. When I worked for the city, I remember we organized I think some Boy Scouts to put mulch on some of the paths in the park, because those groups are looking for projects. Watershed stewards are looking for projects. And so I think for the performance metrics, on a related note, I think these are the wrong metrics. I think the metrics we want to see are the reach of our programs, actual trails that have been stabilized or improved. I'm trying to think what other maintenance might be listed in here, but the actual maintenance activities. But now that you mentioned, I can see how this may have come from Archie.
No, I'm just kidding about that.
Yeah.
but I think I get your point. Like, how many participants do we have in different programs and things like that?
Yeah. How many groups engaged? Because I think there are plenty of opportunities out there. Hey, Alderwoman Tierney, I saw your hand up.
Yeah, I don't know what the right word is, but I know that the little Fleet Street Park is a perfect example of sort of optimizing what Parks and Recs does, or leveraging what they do with the potential of the neighborhood. I mean, all that they expect is for Parks and Recs to do a basic service of trash, the trash cleanup or something, or just some kind of basic service. And when they know that the city is going to provide that, then, they plant and they have all that, there's plantings and donations and painting the bollards and block parties and, the rest. So I think I'm not sure what the word is, but, leverage Parks and Rec's basic services for community participation.
I think leverage is the right word. I think that. And I think there's a lot of community associations that are, wanting to do that. Some of them do it, without even asking, they'll do certain beautification projects.
And look at how much we were able to accomplish out at Waterworks Park with the bike trails that were put in by volunteers. And they also maintain them, right? So in that case, we found an interest group that had a clear motivation and incentive to do that themselves. And maybe we can do the same thing with again, the watershed stewards might be one option to keep their network engaged. We could have them do annual maintenance on, see if they want to do this, annual maintenance on some trails in the parks, that kind of thing.
Yeah.
All right, anything else on this item?
When did Greenscape get to be as big of a thing as it is? I was pretty impressed with how many people came out for that last weekend. Has it been in that kind of 72 projects around the city range for a while, or?
Yeah, I think it started under Ellen Moyer.
It did, yeah.
But it's ballooned. It's really ballooned into.
And the city has been great about it, supplying materials and so forth, but the communities all really pitch in.
Yeah.
Okay, back. All right, so we guys move on to the next goal, which had to do with leveraging opportunities for expanded recreational use of Waterworks Park. And again, another goal, I think we just make it shorter and move some of these down to the metrics in terms of, but this is already, I think, well underway, but it's certainly good to include in here. Alderwoman Tierney?
No, this is what I was talking about on, what was it, goal 1, you have addressed it here as far as the accessibility, through improved bike and pedestrian connections, access points.
Yeah.
But I guess this just speaks to Waterworks Park, but yeah, okay.
We'll see if Alderman Gay wants to put in something about dirt bikes in here.
Yeah.
There was something else horrifying. I forgot, was it going to charge? There was some kind of revenue thing. I don't know.
Well, I mean, I grew up dirt biking, and honestly, with today's mountain bikes, there's a fine line between an electric assist mountain bike that has really fat tires on them and an electrified dirt bike. It's just there's not much difference these days, and that line's going to continue to blur. So we will have to kind of figure out what exact impacts we're going to be trying to reduce. And but then there's also access in terms of how people get their bikes and things too. And you have access points, but I think in terms of transportation to the facility, which I think we mentioned a bit earlier, that might be nice. I know there's going to be the Wee Trail to get there, but some people I think would probably prefer to take a shuttle or something with their bikes right to the park as an option. Anything else on this community facilities section before we go to the next one? All right, Julian, could you go up to slide 67? Thank you. This just, I guess, is the, well, I mean, can you explain a bit the purpose of this slide? Because I'll be honest, I mean, I think all these items are great, but it just seemed like it was thrown in here. And I think maybe it's showing or explaining more how it fits into the overall plan would be good.
Yeah, this is this is an expansion of that slide we talked a lot about at the beginning. It's really, the intent would be for this content to be early in the comp plan to really guide all of the goals and recommended actions. You know, I think we want all of them to stem from these principles. That's kind of the intent. So in that tree of organization, you know, it's principles, then goals, then metrics, then recommended actions. Kind of that's the way we're thinking about it.
Okay, and so on this, for the first principle, just wanted to point out that we do have an adopted goal for carbon neutrality by 2050. And I don't know if you want to mention that or where.
Yes. Good point.
On the second one, for improved water quality, we also have our watershed improvement plan targets, the WIP that could be included. I don't know how much you want to get into the targets with this slide since it's focusing on principles, but just throwing it out there. And in terms of the third item, adapting to increased flooding, you know, reduce economic loss and number of people exposed. But even more than that, I think it's really an existential threat for the city. It's not just about exposure or about flooding. It's about you know, how do we maintain the cultural, historical resources that we have, and yeah, really survive for the future. I think I like the next two principles. The last one, preserving and restoring environmental assets. Limit the loss of natural infrastructure that can help to reduce flooding and storm surge, increase biodiversity, limit heat impacts. I guess my question for this would be how this ties in with some of the, you know, I think there was a bit of an emphasis on some infill development. And so how does this tie in? Because, you know, sometimes some of the infill development may not obviously make sense because of the areas they're proposing to clear, or if it's new development anyway, right? If they're proposing to clear, to take down some, you know, or build on some low elevation floodplain or near a floodplain, those assets might be assets currently, but they also might be assets in the future as sea level rises, you know, just making sure we have room for wetland expansion and that kind of thing. But I guess my question really is just how do you see this tying in with connecting it to the infill development? Would it be, I guess, primarily new development, new infill?
Yeah, that's a good point. I mean, I think it means we have to clarify. I think that was a takeaway from the last meeting we had, you know, needing some more clarity on what we mean by infill development and sort of the I guess the ideal scenario for that, you know, where we are looking to preserve the features that are functioning, you know, the ecological function that may already be there. This one is, it's in here. I would say a big part of the intent is to really address the places that are, already hotspots, so it wasn't really trying to encourage the, development of the places that aren't heat islands, but I could see why some clarity could be needed.
Maybe we can put something about, so with our resiliency grant that we're working on, we want to take what we learned from that, identify parcels where it would make sense to use the REPI program to buy properties for environmental preservation. So maybe that could be worked into the goal or the performance measure that, we identify land that meets this criteria for the REPI program.
Yeah.
Because we don't want to have more development in floodplains. We want to have no development in floodplains.
Yeah, and I think we need to make sure that the goals don't conflict with each other too much. I think I get into this more in the next section, but with the last comp plan, we had some really good goals in there, like meeting the tree canopy goal. And I can't remember if I mentioned this last time or not, but we have like the tree canopy goal, but actually translating that into the recommended actions for that, I think mostly had to do with tree planting, from what I remember. But at the same time, some of our approach to growth may be preventing us from actually achieving the tree canopy increase, because I think most of the loss, at least back then, I think was happening with probably new development. We've gotten some of that under control, but now some of the loss, as you said, is now due to most likely some of the backyard trees, so to speak, the unprotected trees. And so I think it's a matter of getting some further action items that'll really help to achieve these goals that we have. And so in this case,
I think we have to be careful about how we measure success. And hopefully once we have this plan with the performance measures, and we're going to be doing an annual report on this is the progress we've made on all of these. Hopefully then it will be more consistent as one document, working towards these goals together instead of working against each other, which I agree that often happens with our existing comprehensive plan, because they're all good goals, but if you take this one here and look at it in isolation, it has a different impact than if you're looking at them all together and measuring them together.
Yeah, exactly. Well, good to know you're thinking about that. Any other comments on this slide from the committee before we move on to the next?
I think it just risks, maybe just to me, but it just risks some sort of a gap between the list of principles and the title. I don't know, and I wish I had some kind of suggestion, but the adaptive city for, quality of life, or what the adaptive city for what? Or did you think that's what? I guess it maybe it's just some people might not know what adaptive city means.
Oh yeah, we do have some narrative that describes kind of the intent of these visions.
Okay.
So I think that would help. I understand.
Okay.
So this presentation has kind of shorthand for a lot of things that would be fleshed out. Yeah.
Okay.
All right. So we have about half. Well, if we try to stick to beginning out by 5, another half hour. We have one more section to go. People okay? Moving on. Any other comments on this adaptive city slide? No. Okay. So moving on to sensitive areas. Julian, could you move forward, I guess, 2-3 slides? And this one I thought was, a bit disturbing. But it shows you on the left that the canopy is declining, and clearly. And I think, granted, we've passed a number of new laws and regulations, which I think are and will help, but that they're going to take time, because I have a feeling this loss. Well, yeah, it goes back to 2017, so that's before this council. So and before we took action this term, but it'll be interesting to see when we can get another assessment of this, if any of our efforts are actually helping, as we really seek to reverse this and start going in the right direction again. But a question I had on the right, I guess, so residential loss, tree canopy decline most on residential properties. Did you have any, I guess I'm just curious in terms of more, what led you to that conclusion? And did you look at any of the, I guess we don't have too many commercial properties really.
These are actually straight from the study that the University of Vermont consultant did. So that's kind of what they determined to be through their spatial analysis. And I've had some pretty constructive meetings with Brian Adams to kind of think about programs that could expand the amount, that obviously preservation isn't, or the mitigation that isn't probably going to be enough. And so how do we expand tree planting? And I think some of this has been already introduced by the mayor, kind of shortly after Brian and I talked about this idea of a kind of, replant Annapolis program, similar to what the watershed stewards have. I think that's been announced as a thing. And Brian and I certainly agree that encouraging more tree planting within residential communities where there's a stewardship network in place already is one of the best ways to ensure their survival. As much as the heat islands are along the major arterials and want better tree canopy along West Street, and it's rough for those trees to survive in those places with just without some better system of maintaining them. So that's kind of
yeah, that'd be sounds like it might be a good goal to add. So I want to move on to slide 74, which is the first goal. And this deals with developing a comprehensive and equitable approach to resilience that addresses places impacted by climate change beyond flood zones and socially vulnerable communities that may be disproportionately impacted by climate events. That's also kind of a long-winded goal. Again, I certainly agree with it, but I think we just need to make it more concise. But in terms of the recommended actions, the one is complete the city's draft resilience plan and ensure that it includes an equitable resilience framework. And I think look forward to seeing that. And one of the questions I know I have about that is if it is going to include what actions we need to take over the next decade, because I think we really need to know that so we can adequately plan what we need to do, how much we need to spend by this date, I guess, or for the Resilience Authority if we end up setting that up. But I'm not sure a full vulnerability assessment like that has really been done for the entire city. I know we've done a lot for downtown and Eastport, especially downtown though, because we also had the cultural assessment. But it seems like a good necessary first step would be to do a vulnerability assessment for the entire city. So in particular, that'd be, I think we need to do something more robust for Eastport, but also obviously my own ward around Back Creek, because we left out a whole side of Back Creek. And then we have really all of our creeks. We should be looking at the waterfront on all the creeks. Because I was maybe even College Creek in terms of, I don't know, St. John's, on how much public shoreline we actually have there. But in any case, I think we need some of those basics before we can really get to work on responding to climate issues. Another question I had on number 2 is, what do you mean by resilience hubs?
This is something that Jackie is working on. It's I believe we might want to reference the state's definition. This is a program from the State Department of Energy that is working with cities and jurisdictions to make places more self-sufficient energy-wise. So I believe we're applying this to the Newtown project as kind of a trial. It's essentially adapting to renewable energy is one of the, I think that's kind of at the core of it. But the idea is that places like Pit Moyer that we rely on and, catastrophic events, that are places of refuge, that those places are really super sufficient, self-sufficient from energy loss and that kind of thing. That's my understanding of it. So I think Jackie's pursuing some funding to expand that. But.
Okay. And it looks like Alderman Arnett is experiencing some energy loss with his yawns there.
No.
Joking. All right. So
I think we need yet another meeting today.
Yeah, that's right. So I also had a comment I mentioned a bit earlier in terms of the wetland expansion. I think that'd be a good additional sensitive area to protect, would be identifying some wetlands that would be vulnerable to sea level rise, and if we can work in any kind of wetland expansion areas to allow them to move and grow, because we need them to grow if we want them to continue to provide the benefits, but also provide the buffers to sea level rise.
Yeah.
And also maybe worth mentioning some of the protecting the sensitive historic resources, which I know we do the plan for already, but I think that'd be good to tie into this.
Yeah.
Anything else on this goal in the committee?
Who's finishing the resiliency plan? Is that in-house now, or I assume that was the
Jackie is working on it. And we're also, the grant we have too, we're also going to use that to fill in some of the gaps of the Dan Nees, Joanna Throw one. So.
Yeah. Okay. So next one is goal 2. This talks about expanding the city's tree canopy by prioritizing planting. But again, with this goal, you could just end it at, I think, expand the city's tree canopy and then put the rest under recommended actions or something like that. Because I do think the heat islands is an important issue, but there's certainly more. There's more than one reason to, multiple reasons to expand tree canopy.
Doesn't Parks and Recs have or is that just benches? Do they have a tree planting memorial or buy a tree, or is that? I think it's just benches.
Yeah, it might just be benches. I had a question about number 2 for recommended actions. To revise city's tree mitigation policy to require. Oh, yes, we got into that a bit already. I think this is I think putting this into the comp plan is going to incur quite a bit of. It could potentially incur quite a bit of blowback because the mitigation policy, for example, the Forest Conservation Act, that requires that any mitigation related to the FCA has to be put into a perpetual easement, conservation easement. We can't do 5-year maintenance, simply 5-year maintenance agreement on those. I mean, they do have maintenance agreements for the actual vegetation installed, but I think you're referring to, essentially what you're referring to is trying to do a 5-year, sounds like a 5-year easement, conservation easement?
This is more directed at offsite planting than on-site. I don't know if that would help to clarify that, any on-site mitigation would probably still need to be in that perpetual easement, but I think this is the project that comes to mind is the Venby Beach project, where there's a huge number of trees that need to be planted, and I don't think we know yet where they could go because of the perpetual easement that's required. And so I guess the thought was, well, it's difficult to plant in the public right of way with that in the language, that the 5-year maintenance agreement would perhaps sort of encourage that, but.
Yeah, I think Alderman Savage is saying either way, definitely on site it has to be, but I think it's kind of been not a controversy, but we've gotten stuck on this before, is the degree to which the conservation easement disincentivizes off-street planting. So, maybe we have to think about the wording for that action there.
Yeah, because with the disincentive, there's a lot to look into this, Eric, in terms of, and I just think you're going to open up a huge can of worms, because the community is going to see this and say, oh, the city wants to remove perpetual conservation easements, and that undermines the entire premise of Forest Conservation Act. And critical area is also separate. I don't entirely know what, I'm suspecting they have a similar perpetual easement requirement, but that's also a different beast. And I fully admit we may need to go back and look at adjusting that mitigation, but I think it's premature to do that until we really identify what the problem is, and if there truly are a shortage of mitigation sites. Another option is just to simply open it up to other mitigation options. Like with the Forest Conservation Act, it goes down a list of preferred mitigation to give them a lot of different options. I think about half a dozen different options from street trees, because if they can't find off-site let's focus on forest conservation. If they can't find off-site mitigation, at least in terms of large-scale tree plantings, they have an opportunity to do street tree plantings, which again, I think we have plenty of spaces. They also have the opportunity to do, protect established forests, but you also have that same issue of, but the one thing I know jurisdictions usually do when they secure easements, they provide a financial incentive. And so one of the questions we have to look at is, well, are developers just complaining because they don't want to incentivize people to do this? Are they not looking hard enough? Are they not speaking to the right staff? Because one thing they could do is offer a couple $1,000s to residents to put perpetual easements on their property and to allow these plantings. That may be enough to convince them, but that would probably be cheaper than doing the fee in lieu. So it would still make sense for the developer to do, but I think we have a lot more research to do before we go to this extreme. That's just my advice. I think you're going to be opening up quite a can of worms. So maybe rewording. I'm trying to think how to express your desire. Maybe I think just rewording this to be more general, to say evaluating our mitigation policies and alternatives to ensure that we're able to achieve the mitigation goals
in a more streamlined.
Yeah.
With a more streamlined process, or
and equitable process, right? Because we don't want this to be too burdensome for the developers, obviously, because we want the mitigation. We don't want the forest loss. Ideally, we don't want the fee in lieu. That's why we set the fee in lieu so high. So we do need to make sure the mitigation works. But I'm sorry, but after years of working directly with developers, and Sally, I'm sure you know just as well as I, but they're very quick to complain, and I think we need to be careful to look into the validity of their complaints to really identify where the shortcomings are, because before we go to such a drastic change. And also our laws have only been in place for a year or less. But again, I'm not shutting the door to that. I think, especially with the critical area, the challenge is there are less places to mitigate. Forest conservation can go essentially the whole city, but critical area is much more limited. But I think there are other alternatives we can look at first before going to moving away from the perpetual easements. So just my more than 2 cents, that's probably a couple dollars worth there of input. And another idea I had on this expansion for the tree canopy would be to convert streets into green streets and narrower. I think we may have mentioned this last time, narrowing the streets to include more street trees and traffic calming and that kind of thing, like you've done on Bay Ridge. And again, the elephant in the room for this, the goal is kind of the forest loss from new development. And again, I think we've addressed a lot of that, but through the forest conservation and critical area, but I don't know, maybe worth bringing up in this to see if there are any additional actions we need to take for new development or redevelopment. Because I guess we do have afforestation requirements for new development if it's over an acre, but maybe we need to include more afforestation, which is adding forest to an unforested lot. You know, for example, if Watergate or somebody, I'm picking on Watergate today, if Watergate wants to redevelop, maybe they have to include, and maybe they do already, I don't know, Sally, but they have to expand tree canopy at the same time. Anything else from the committee? I'm sorry, I know I'm doing a lot of talking here.
No, I was trying to, I was pleading ignorance. I was trying to look at the code that I know I helped with, but I didn't know what the perpetual easement was. I didn't know that we asked them that, or maybe that's explained differently in the code.
Yeah, I don't know where in the code it is exactly, but
okay.
if it's your mitigation, it's kind of the mechanism we ensure that your mitigation is perpetual, because you can't plant some tree, meet your mitigation requirements, and then 2 years later cut down those trees.
Yeah.
Okay, so hence the word easement. Okay.
They become part of the approval of the project, and that's how we ensure that everybody knows that they're part of the approval of the project.
Okay.
Yeah. So well, like Dr. Nash said, it ensures that they don't, because they would if they could. They'll just do a planting somewhere on one of their empty lots and let it sit for 5 years, and then they'll cut down the trees and build on it, completely negating the entire purpose of the mitigation, because the trees weren't even old enough to provide any kind of benefit. So it's certainly, now on the other hand, I know in Pennsylvania they have conservation easements where you can buy them out if you pay all the back taxes. But I don't think, I've never heard of that being done in Annapolis or in Maryland. So these are kind of those, I guess that's the challenge you face, is like if you change that perpetual easement, how do you ensure that the trees aren't going to just get removed? Because again, if they get removed in 5 years,
like some places have TDRs, transfer of development rights, and I mean maybe that's something to look at. Is you sell the TDRs instead of having an easement, you've sold a TDR, and then if you wanted to change it, you could buy out of it. I mean, maybe that's something to explore for these tree plantings.
Sure. Yeah.
But do you speak of traffic calming elsewhere? Because Rob brought up a good scenario with the tree calming, introducing more space for trees. I see that when I visit my son in Washington, D.C., all of a sudden there's these streets that are all, closed except to residents only. And he explained to me that it was mostly for traffic calming, but I didn't know it was also an avenue to introduce more trees. That's kind of cool. Is that true?
So we do have a recommendation in transportation, although it may not have been, I'm not sure how it's spelled out, regarding complete streets. Developing a complete streets policy. The county is kind of moving in that direction as well. They already have a policy, but it's not really fleshed out in terms of what it looks like on the ground, and so I think what I was writing as I was listening to Rob is, just being very clear that street trees are an important component of that, and that they can function in that way, for traffic calming. They're not the only tool for that, but yeah, that's kind of, I think it would certainly go in transportation and maybe somewhere in here too, but.
Okay.
Arnett?
So just as earlier we were talking about installing solar panels in big parking lots, which actually may have some cooling. I don't know how much heat those solar panels reflect back, but I was thinking in places like the Giant or St. Mary's parking lot, this is another place where trees could be planted. Tree islands could also be part of a stormwater mitigation program. So, when we're looking for opportunities, I think we need to look for any big blank open spaces across the city and suggest that, and that may be a program where when a developer needs to plant trees off-site, we suggest to them St. Mary's Church is amenable to taking planting some trees in their parking lot and putting in a stormwater management program, or the Giant, or the Eastport Shopping Center, what have you. So again, tree canopy doesn't have to just be street trees or residents' backyards. It could be any big blank space.
Yeah, I really like that idea, Alderman. So including maybe include parking lot trees in the definition of street trees or something like that, because you're absolutely right. You could probably they might lose one spot, but you could probably plant a large tree in one spot. Maybe you'd have to take out two and put perennial pavers around the tree, but I think that's certainly something that's doable.
It also adds to the aesthetics of the community. There's nothing worse than driving by a big blank parking lot, but if you're looking at nice trees in there, it breaks up all that macadam.
Yeah. Anything else on this goal? All right, let me just throw one other idea on this goal, Eric, would be adding action about protecting those large trees that we have established already, and include something about creating street trees that allow for tree installation. And I'm thinking, in particular, just as an example, like West Annapolis, making sure that we can protect that streetscape structure that's going to allow for street trees to be planted, right? Because that was one of the motivations in trying to get the setbacks increased on that road, is because large canopy trees couldn't really be planted right next to the road because of the power lines.
I think there might be something that in a different goal, because that's been on my mind as well, is finding the language to prioritize trees might be in the first 10 to 15 feet of the private and the setback area that contribute to the streetscape, that they're not in the public right of way, but they might shade the sidewalk, and I'm almost positive that's somewhere else, but yeah, I agree with you on that for sure.
Okay. All right, Julian, could you go to the next slide, goal 3? And this is another one where I think the action item's in the title, but just simply reinforcing vulnerable shoreline areas. And as an example, for recommended actions, number 1, I already mentioned, I think this needs to get done for more than just, I think it needs to be done for the other wards as well. But also for some potential new actions. I think you can mention our sediment and erosion control program, and perhaps looking at enhancing enforcement or updating our code to meet the current intensity of storm events, because that's really going to have to be done to protect some of our shoreline areas.
And I ask, what is gray infrastructure?
Just bulkhead, kind of hard stuff that's not rip wrap or that kind of basically anything. That's the way I think of it.
And this would include no dirt bites by the shoreline?
Anything else on this goal?
One could argue that there might be more erosion control areas that need to be addressed other than Truxton Parks, at Upper Spark Creek, but I don't know what they are right now.
But Truxton Park is bad.
Yeah, it's bad. But you kind of loop around and there's others, but it's hard. Some of it might be private.
Yeah.
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 Okay.
All right. So next slide, Julian.
Yep.
Goal 4, promoting coordinated approach to flood access.
Oh yeah, farmers markets. Yay.
Sorry, food access. I think I said flood access.
Yeah.
Food access. Yeah. I thought this was great. I didn't have any comments on this.
It's
Anybody
great.
else?
Well, I just wonder why this isn't part of the natural environment. So obviously this section is more than just environmental issues.
So the sensitive areas element really, it captures a lot. And part of this is just that these are, I would say, generally environmental goals. This is probably the most explicitly environmental chapter in the comp plan, and historically sensitive areas by the state's definition only refers to coastal area, flood zones, low-lying areas. We wanted to expand it and to kind of acknowledge that there's sensitivity beyond those areas, that if you look at the heat island impacts, or really climate change is not just impacting people who live in the, close to the flood zone. So that's why this kind of is here.
But I guess foods are certainly biological products, but it just feels like this one is right tucked in the middle of a whole bunch of what are clearly natural environment things. The next goal is biodiversity. So when I saw it, I said, well, that's a good goal, but I just don't see how it fits here. But that's just me, maybe.
I think it's a good question. Okay, so next slide, please, is goal 5. And as
We'll look at that. We'll make sure it makes sense in the narrative, or put it where it does make sense.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that'd be good to explain. I'm sure Ross is going to be the only one with that question. So goal 5, as you said, deals with expanding the city's biodiversity. And again, I think you can just put a period there and move some of these over to your actions. And in terms of the recommended action number 2, prioritize potential conservation easements that are contiguous with existing conservation areas. And I guess in this case, it's prioritized simply for enhancing biodiversity. But it may be worth expanding to talk about, I don't know how much you want to get into this with the recommended actions, but the importance of having wildlife corridors. And I think we need to, again, as I said earlier, we need to make sure that these areas, including the contiguity, would be make sure these areas are priority for preservation when being reviewed by staff. And so some of these are going to be able to, under the Forest Conservation Act, these areas would automatically have a higher protection value. But if it's not, and I think critical area we got to put in there, but if it's not either of those, would staff have enough leverage to be able to get these areas protected or enhanced? And that's where I think the committee would be happy to work with you to identify, to close any of those gaps. For example, like the backyard tree gap that we've realized we need to expand protection to. So if there's anything else you think we may need to do.
But I'm glad you mentioned wildlife, because every so often I'll get a call. There's a fox in my backyard. Can you send somebody out to kill it? And, I'm kind of delighted to see fox and rabbits. We have lots of rabbits in our backyard. But we don't really have an overall policy. First of all, we don't do it. It's a county function. But I think we should talk about a policy. Do we want to try to kill out all of the natural wildlife that lives in our city, when I think it's a good thing? And in fact, in some cases, some of that wildlife eats things like rats, which is a biodiversity we probably don't want.
Yeah.
Good point. I have to say, somebody hasn't lived full-time in Annapolis in 25 years, that we never saw deer, fox, rabbits growing up in the city in same location. I see them all the time now. It's pretty fascinating. I had an experience right at a few houses in from Bay Ridge Avenue on Jackson Street a couple of weeks ago. Sunday morning, 7 a.m., 7 deer came out of a single family residential yard, gathered in the middle of the street, and then just ran towards Bay Ridge Avenue. I guess they knew it was Sunday morning. They were probably trying to head towards St. Luke's, I'm guessing. But the wildlife corridors are definitely thriving.
Truxton, the neighborhood in Ward 1, Truxton Heights, is just it's amazing. I mean, you see deer there, and then they have a Truxton Heights community group on Facebook, and they'll post seeing an owl, like this beautiful owl. And it's amazing the stuff that they see. It's a nice neighborhood.
So a question for the committee. We have one more goal in this section, and then we have a whole nother section. I forgot what it is. So does the committee want to just try to bust through this next section now, or schedule something else? I mean, I think if we push through, we might be able to finish by 5:30.
Alderman Savage, one of the conditions for having this special meeting today was that the hard stop was at 5.
Okay.
Okay.
The TV crew has other meetings that they have to do.
What section is it? I mean, the other option is we could read it and send it in questions or something. I don't know. I think we're running out of meeting slots.
So do we have like 5-10 minutes to kind of wrap up?
We could also come to your next scheduled meeting and just wrap everything up then.
I think there's two good things that are happening here. I think some of the editorial comments, and I have to profess I made some to Eric yesterday when we were talking about my town hall. I think less is more, and moving things around is good. But also, I think that there's value in the planning staff coming to the committees and getting this kind of input. And I'd hate to shortcut it. A lot of work has gone into this. Mm-hmm. And I think some of it is, like the Prego ad, it's in there. A lot of things are thrown in, and now's the time to start sorting it out and distilling it down and coordinating it. And I hope we're giving you value added with the comments we're making today. And I would like to continue to take the time to do it.
Is it it's the watershed section?
Yeah, so
that's pretty important. Yeah,
this is probably our most important section.
Yeah, that's a big one.
So, well, I guess the question is to staff: do we have time to wait to do this until our next environmental matters meeting, or do we need to try to schedule another one to get this closed out? Because our next meeting is, let me look. Does anybody have that handy besides me? It looks like May 19th. So it's kind of, we could always try to do a special meeting. I'd be open to that, or just reschedule that May meeting. Maybe we could reschedule it to be earlier.
I think we do. I think what we're trying to do by the end of May is share it would be 10, essentially 10 days after that. What we would like to do is release a kind of a document that has our draft goals, metrics, recommendations that the public could kind of see is, the direction we're heading in, and have a mechanism for people to comment at that point. So I think meeting on the 19th would be fine, personally, but I'm meeting on the 20th with ECA to share stuff. So,
okay. As long as you feel like that's going to give you enough time to, respond.
Yeah, I mean, and honestly, we've made way more progress with this committee than any other committee. So we might have to push that May date a little bit here, but we'll just see.
I mean, because with the water section, I had a number of questions, but I think it really also revolves around the impervious surface. How do we actually get that reduction in impervious surfaces? And how do we tie that into actual actions? But also, how do we overhaul the watershed restoration fund to, again, be either an incentive or escalation, requirement to get these properties to convert. So we need to figure out how to get to our goal, which is reducing the impervious surface. And that's where I think it'd be good to get some harder actions in this. So that's really, I think, the gist of my responses. But if you want any of my comments, I did comment in the presentation. I can send them to you earlier, and then we could have more of a discussion at the committee, whichever you'd prefer.
I'll take your comments in advance for sure. It would be good. Sounds like you have some.
All right. So it sounds like we are going to wait. We'll put this, Ms. Green, could you put this on our agenda for the next meeting in May?
Yeah, I wouldn't put much else, Rob, because stormwater is a big deal. Yeah.
It is, and it'll, yeah.
I don't know if you have any legislation that night or,
No, once I get the tree legislation submitted, but that's probably going to come to committee when that's our month after. Okay. All right. Anything else from the committee?
Hey, do we have a work session tomorrow?
No.
It's not. I was just looking at my calendar. Is that canceled?
It was canceled.
Okay.
We're going to do it, but it's just a matter of when.
Okay, that was the one for policing. Okay.
Gavin and Sheila had a conflict, so which is fine. I wanted to wait until after the public hearings anyway. Okay. Anything else from staff before we adjourn?
Thank you so much for your time. And Julie and Takia. I know you guys have had a lot of meetings this week. But look, Takia's still smiling.
Surprising. Yeah, thank you.
Fred wants to know, I don't have the updated Finance Committee agenda. Do you know what we have on tomorrow? Okay, so are we just doing deliberations?
And CDBG deliberations.
Oh, CDB. Okay. All right. Thank you.
Well, so I'm going to just give a big thank you to staff, to Eric and Sally, because this is really appreciate you taking the time to come to not only our committee but the others, but especially I think our committee. I've really enjoyed the conversation and hearing your direction and thinking behind these, and just appreciate you willing to have a conversation with us about this. I think it'll really make it something that we all feel invested in and have a connection to when it's put forward for adoption. I think that's really ultimately the goal, because I hopefully you agree it's good. It's better to hear these things now than at the 11th hour.
Definitely.
That's for sure. Yeah.
Guys, I'm sorry, but Julian really has to go.
Okay.
I need another meeting.
Move adjourn.
Second.
All those in favor? Aye.
Bye.
Good night.